Hey guys, it's your boy Java Monkey J. Today my friend and I are talking World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King. This section was taken from our World of Warcraft tier discussion where we ranked each expansion in a tier list format and discussed our thoughts and opinions on the game. If you'd like to see that full video, it is linked below. However, I will be posting shortened videos, one for each expansion in the coming days, so subscribe so you don't miss them. I've been Java Monkey J. Peace. Where should we go next? Do you want to go hardcore next? Or do you want to continue down the timeline?
Or Wrath of the Lich King. Let's do Wrath. I think Wrath is a really good one.
I like Wrath.
I really liked Wrath when it was originally here. I really liked Wrath when we came around the second time. I think Wrath is a great expansion. I think it's one of the best. I think it's top 3 certainly. But man, it's hard to give it an A. It really is. Knowing where I land Wrath in terms of some of the other things on this list, it's really hard to make an argument. Wrath, so here's the thing, and when I talk about, Wrath defining the genre that a lot of other games have copied, I think that it defines the genre of personal progression and the way that your end game progression works. I think in Wrath is really what defines the MMO genre today. That you have these different, pillars of the game, whether those are dungeons, PvP, or raiding, that kind of have evolved into the pillars of the whole genre.
Yeah.
And the way that you progress your character through those is also, again, very much genre defining. But I think that the class design and the class diversity isn't quite where I would want it to be. I think that in general, the specs and the gameplay of the raids and such are not where I want them to be. I realize that I'm probably on the extreme end of both of those spectrums because I think that Mythic raiding is fantastic, and I think that the difficulty and challenge there.
Well, let's back up for a second because
really good.
Because Wrath is really like 2 different games, maybe even like 3 different games, because the transition from Nax and Wrath to IECC at the end of the phase and everything in between is just weird. It's all over the place.
I like the varied difficulty a little bit. I think that's kind of a cool touch to have content that is speedrun content, right? Nax is speedrun content. And even Old War was speedrun content by the end of it. But you've also got ICC where is anybody speedrunning ICC? Looked? I haven't looked.
I don't know. I don't think so.
I can't imagine.
You can't get HL. A lot of people can't get HLK down, so probably not.
Yeah, there's only 25 or 50 guilds that have killed Lich King.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in 2 weeks. It's probably a lot more than that now. It's probably in thousands. I would assume.
Yeah, but no, I think that the difficulty spike there is really cool.
It's kind of cool, but then also too, in ICC phase specifically, I think your argument about class diversity kind of goes out the window a little bit because the tier sets are designed to bring classes that are down or that have been down, and the itemization is designed to bring those classes up. I look at Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest goes from dog shit dicks the entirety of Wrath to actually a viable and good spec in ICC. It completely transforms the class.
So Shadow Priest. So first of all, this is the most extreme borrowed power that we have had up to this point in the game. These are the strongest tier sets that we ever see at this point in the game.
Oh yeah, for sure. Lathraki still talks about mage. This is the most insane mage tier ever.
It's the most insane mage tier ever. It's the most insane paladin tier ever. It's the most insane, even balanced druid. This is an insane tier set for them, right? And they're not super strong in this phase.
Yeah.
No, I mean the tier sets are so strong, and so this is the era of where the borrowed power really starts. And it's something that I think Blizzard does a good job of keeping in check through Kata and Mists and WoD, and really doesn't start to become problematic until you get to Legion. But it's the idea that so much of your class's functional kit is baked into the way that your tier set works. I think Ret Paladin is really a good example of this, because functionally Ret Paladin doesn't work as a class until you add their tier set on there, and you add Tiny Abomination in a jar. And you have so much of your power baked into those 2 bonuses, right? And if you lose one of those bonuses, like when you're leveling up in Cataclysm, it's going to feel horrible, right?
Yeah.
There is a real world, right? There's a real world where Tiny Abomination in a jar is pre-raid Biss. It may be even Biss in Bastion of Twilight. Can you imagine that?
That's crazy.
That is how strong that trinket is.
Yeah, well, it scales them harder as they get more of their tier. So it's like initially like 400 DPS, and then by the end of it, it's like plus 1200. Like, it's insane.
In my idea is the goal for class and spec diversity is not just that every class is viable to bring to a raid, but that there's a reason that you want to bring all of them to a raid, and those slots are competitive because, wow, you really wish you had those tools. Wow, you wish you had this buff. Wow, you wish you had, this class is particularly good at this particular mechanic, and so you really wish you had those, right? And this is something that I think even modern retail struggles with a lot. And I think that Cataclysm will continue to struggle with a lot because they're really like, yeah, we can talk about homogenization being the problem, but like retail has done a decent job of having niches for classes, in particular the way their damage profiles work, and that's not something that we really have to deal with in Classic, where like damage profiles, what the fuck is that? But it's something that you can have very much 1 minute burst windows, right? Like Fire is the classic example, Fire Mage, where they have the 1 minute burst window on their combustions. And this was like what carried them through like Castle Nathria and through a lot of Mythic raids. This is like what they bring is 1 minute burst windows. And it turns out that that's a really strong mechanic on a fight like Mythic Sludge Fist, where you have 1 minute damage amps when he hits a pillar, when he charges a pillar, you get a huge damage amp every minute. And so if you have a class that has a 1 minute burst window, it really extremely increases in value. Whereas if you had a class with a 90-second burst window and you can only hit the first one and the fourth one.
Makes sense. So all that to say, really, Wrath doesn't really bring interesting class design in a way that some other expansions do.
Yes, and I think that Wrath is where they began to do it. Like I think that TBC is kind of not. They like TBC, they tried to make every class viable, but they didn't do a good job. I think Wrath, they did a good job of making every class viable. But I think that the further in WoW's history they do a better job of differentiating, every class has a valuable reason to bring them. Every class is valuable. And I don't think that they've gotten there in Wrath, and I think that that's a problem.
But so better class design than Classic, right?
Certainly better class design than Classic. I mean, Classic is really kind of the epitome of there are three valuable classes, and they're also the only viable classes.
But I mean, as far as like the legacy goes of Wrath, I mean, Wrath almost seemingly has like as much of a legacy aspect to it as Classic does. I mean, you talked about before how a lot of games, modern MMOs, base their design based off of Wrath, and I mean, I don't think in the WoW universe you get anything larger than you going to go kill the Lich King that's been built up over years and years and multiple games of this like story, this arc.
Is the thing I think is Wrath's strongest point is I think the writing, this is the peak. The writing is downhill from here for the rest of the World of Warcraft, and I think that this is something that I'm really hoping for the War Within and the World Soul Saga, that they kind of try and bring back. I'm not expecting them to. I don't have high hopes, but you know what? If they fix one thing from Dragonflight moving into War Within, I hope it's the writing. That's my sneak peek for when we get to Dragonflight. Wrath really is that pinnacle of this is a Warcraft 3 story, right? Yeah. This is Warcraft 3. Or finishing up or tying up that storyline that was written, that what was this whole universe was defined
based on. Yeah. You are going to go kill the fucking Lich King, bro. Insane.
From that perspective, I think that, you have, amazing writing of this amazing villain, this peak of awesome. You have the introduction of so many of the like fundamental systems that like really drive the genre, and like not everybody loves daily quests, right? Not everybody loves doing your daily heroic or doing your weekly raid boss, right? But like these are things that have driven, I hate to say driving engagement because it has such a nasty connotation.
It feels bad in the modern sense. Gaming. Yeah.
But like driving engagement wasn't always such a dirty thing, right? Like having a reason to log in was something that you wanted, right? And these give you kind of a reason to, hey, maybe you're really busy today, but you really wish you could squeeze in that 30 minutes to go get your daily done, right? That's something that you really want to do. So this engagement driving kind of idea was not so frowned upon once upon a time. And I think I'd drop it A. I think it's A tier.
The thing is though, is like everything that we've talked about so far, it makes it sound like it should be S tier comparatively to classic. But for me, putting Wrath in S tier feels so bad after coming back and playing it again, and it's just not there. Like it's just not as amazing as we thought.
So my fundamental issues with Wrath of the Lich King, particularly Wrath of the Lich King Classic, are not really based on the design of the game. I think that the class design isn't where I want it to be, but it's much better than Classic. It's much better than TBC.
Yeah.
More classes viable. More classes have a real rotation, right? You look at Fire Mage finally getting Hot Streak, right? Yep. Fire Mage plays like a Fire Mage at this point. This is what Fire Mage will continue to be forever.
Same with AF.
Like
AF finally comes into itself.
So Aflock finally plays like an Aflock, and it will never be this good ever again. It just gets worse from here. It's really rough that they eliminate snapshotting and eliminate Eternal Affliction and all that. Like all of these kind of boring changes that they end up making to AF and making it not really feel dot based. You'll get to your like Malefic Rapture where it's like a nuke spec and stuff like that.
Yeah.
This is peak Affliction in my mind. At the same time, Balanced Druid feels bad. Right? You have half a rotation and it's super RNG, and you have like Mutilate Rogue. You have a true 2-button rotation that has been dominant on the meters for like the entire time.
Yeah.
You have Unholy Decay, where your whole rotation is the 30 seconds of the fight that your gargoyle is out.
Yeah.
And that's like you get a 90 parse if you do that, and then you AFK for the rest of the fight. Like there's some really silly shit in terms of the problems, right? There's a lot of classes that start off that really do feel good. I think that like a lot of hunters will complain about trap weaving. I think trap weaving is actually like one of the funnest things that I did this whole expansion. I thought that the rotation was super engaging, but like now you've got trap launcher, and to me that kind of makes it a little less fun. It's definitely stronger, right? It's definitely massively stronger.
It decreases the skill ceiling for sure.
It decreases the skill ceiling. And that's really what I would like to see more of, is like, I think that there need to be classes that are easy, right? There need to be there need to be spec options that are easy.
Absolutely.
Things like Destruction Warlock, things like I think canonically Frost Mage ends up being the easy mage spec. Arcane I think is better as an example right now. But like there's also just like there's something to really be said about being able to perform at a high level on a more complicated spec and be rewarded for that. And I think that that's a really cool way to feel connected to your character better than to me a lot of the other ways that they've tried to do that in the past. Things like your garrisons and your legendary artifact weapons and stuff. Like truly mastering a class is something that feels really good when you pull it off.
Mm-hmm. But what's worse in Wrath than classic? Like what would put
What's worse?
What's worse?
World engagement, the social contract, right? The things that everybody kind of ephemerally brings up. The being out in the open world and just running into somebody and saying, "Hey, you want to do a dungeon?" Right? That's not a thing that happens in Wrath, but like maybe when you were leveling through the Barrens and you were, at the Wailing Caverns for that one quest where you have to kill a whole bunch of centaurs right there. And you run into like 3 or 4 people that are also doing that quest, and you just, spontaneously decide to do a Wailing Caverns run, right? That's not a thing that happens in Wrath. That's not a thing that happens ever again. That's a Classic only thing, and that's really cool that Classic had that, where it really is about the journey. And when you start talking about the end game of Classic is when it kind of falls apart in my mind. Like 1 to 59, I think it's probably S tier. I think the problems all start at 60.
So where do you think this lies? I mean, do you think that this is better than Classic? Vanilla?
I think it's better, but I think it's still A tier. I don't think it's S. I think that we've talked about some problems with it that, the story's great. Yeah, the class design is better, but I don't think the class design's quite there yet. And I think that's really what we've been disappointed in over the course of the expansion, is that the class design really isn't there. The raids are good, right? But they're hard enough that we have to struggle through them. Generally speaking, as a community, I think that a lot of people have struggled in Ulduar and have struggled in getting 50 of 50 and struggled in ICC, right? Like you don't have the classic, beer and pretzels, everybody's asleep raid, and you don't have the satisfaction of learning and progging, mythic raid mechanics, right? Like none of these fights are that hard, but they're hard enough that a lot of players are struggling. Yeah. And I think that is kind of the worst balance of these two worlds, right? If you can't have average players clapping the content like Classic was, and you can't challenge the best of the best to take more than an hour and a half to clear the raid, those two things combined make it feel really bad. And I don't think that they should add like mythic raiding to Classic, right? Like that's obviously not the answer. But like it feels bad to spend, weeks wiping on a raid that was solved 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, it does. It does 100%. And it also feels bad watching some super group come through and clear it in an hour and a half. And not struggle once. I mean, like, yeah, you're 100% right.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that Wrath is a great step up. I think that it improved on Classic in pretty much every way, but I don't think that it's quite there yet.